The glass didn't break when it hit the floor. It just cracked, a single fracture running from the base to the rim, clean and quiet, like a decision that had already been made. Osei picked it up carefully, the way she always picked things up at the Calloway estate, as though the objects there were more valuable than she was. She set it on the sideboard. She did not tell anyone. She understood that this was the kind of thing you handled yourself when you were the only person in the room who had not inherited their place at the table. Her name was Osei, not a first name, a last name she had kept from her father, who had kept it from his father, who had brought it from Ghana to a rented basement in Brampton when he was 23 years old with $40 and a suitcase held shut with a belt. She had a first name, of course. It was on her passport, her incorporation papers, the plaque beside the door of the 42nd floor office she had built from nothing. But most people who mattered, truly mattered, the way money matters, called her Dr. Osei, and most people who did not matter called her nothing at all, which was almost the same thing. She had married into the Calloway family 9 years before the night of the Muskoka gathering. The wedding had been small because her family was small and the Calloways had wanted it that way. Her mother-in-law, a woman named Evelyn Calloway, had once described her own generosity in accepting the match as a kind of philanthropy, not with those words exactly, but with the unmistakable cadence of someone who believed them. The drive up to the cottage was 4 hours from the city, and Osei made it alone because her husband, whose name was Frederick Calloway III, had driven up the day before with his brother and his brother's wife to open the boathouse and prepare the dock and do the things that Calloway men did when they gathered in Muskoka in the last week of August, which was mostly stand near water and feel certain about themselves. She had packed her own bag. She had arranged her own transportation. She had, as she did every year since the gatherings began, arrived slightly after everyone else, so that the dynamic of her arrival, the outsider walking into a room already settled, was at least one she could predict. The cottage was not a cottage. It was 12,000 square feet of reclaimed timber and floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking Georgian Bay, with a boathouse larger than the house her father had rented in Brampton, and a dock where Frederick's older brother kept a boat named after their grandmother. It was beautiful in a way that Osei recognized academically, the way you recognize a poem in a language you've studied but never dreamed in. She parked her own car. She carried her own bag up the stone path. The automatic lights came on as she approached the main door, and through the window she could see the silhouettes of the Calloway family arranged around the great room. Frederick's parents, his brother Douglas, Douglas's wife Catherine, 2 of Frederick's cousins, their respective spouses, and a man she didn't recognize who turned out to be Catherine's university friend, visiting from Vancouver, which was the kind of detail that no one had thought to mention to Osei, because no one, in 9 years, had developed the habit of thinking about what Osei might need to know. She opened the door. Her mother-in-law, Evelyn, looked up from the conversation she was having and then returned to it. Frederick crossed the room and kissed her cheek. "You made good time," he said, as though her journey were a logistical achievement, and not the beginning of 4 days she had already begun counting down. The first morning she was ignored, which was ordinary. She had learned early that the Calloway family's particular form of exclusion was not loud. There were no slurs, no confrontations, no dramatic moments she could point to clearly. What there was instead was a continuous, quiet, practiced subtraction. The way a conversation would shift away from her when she entered it, not rudely, but inevitably, the way water moves around an obstacle. The way Catherine would describe a film the group had apparently watched together on the first night, including Frederick, a film no one had thought to mention to Osei, and the way the description continued for several minutes without anyone thinking to pause and acknowledge the obvious. She sat on the back deck with her coffee and watched the lake in the early morning light. It was the color of pewter and very still. A loon called from somewhere to the north. She had always loved loons, not because they were peaceful, but because they were essentially alone and had evolved to be extraordinary in their solitude. By the second morning, she had established a rhythm. She woke early. She made her own coffee before anyone else was up. She sat on the deck and answered emails on her phone, her COO in Waterloo, her lead engineer in Calgary, her investor relations team in New York, quietly, in the gray morning, while the Calloway estate slept around her. She was, in those early hours before the family assembled, able to remember who she was. It became harder, as it always did, once they were all awake. Evelyn Calloway had a particular talent for observation. She watched Osei the way a hostess watches a guest who has used the wrong fork, not with outrage, but with a patient, private satisfaction, waiting for the moment to prove what she had always suspected. She had commented on Osei's hair at the last two gatherings, not cruelly. Evelyn was never crude. She made her observations in the tone of someone offering helpful information. At the gathering 3 years prior, she had touched the end of Osei's braid and said, with genuine curiosity, that she had always wondered how long something like that took to do. At the gathering 2 years prior, she had mentioned, in front of the whole assembled dinner table, that Osei's hair was very striking, wasn't it? Almost like a costume. She meant that as a compliment she hoped Osei understood. Frederick had said nothing both times. He had the quality, common in people who consider themselves kind, of being able to reinterpret any cruelty as a misunderstanding, a trait that required constant revision of the observable evidence and enormous comfort with the process. On the second evening of this particular gathering, Evelyn made a remark about Osei's locks that was phrased as admiration and delivered as assessment. And when Osei did not respond the way Evelyn had expected, with the grateful deflection she had learned to perform in earlier years, there was a pause, and in that pause Douglas's wife Catherine laughed a small, brief, polished laugh that had no specific target, and therefore could not be complained about. Osei set down her fork. She picked it up again. She ate her salmon. She did not leave the table. Later, when she and Frederick were alone in the room that had been assigned to them, always the smallest guest room, always the one farthest from the main living areas, a coincidence that had never been named, she told him what had happened at dinner. He listened. He had the posture of someone listening. When she finished, he said that his mother didn't mean anything by it, that she was from a different generation, that the gathering was only 2 more days, and then they would be home. That's not an answer, Osei said. I know, he said. She lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and calculated, not for the first time, what it would cost her to leave. Not financially. She had built a company worth $460 million. From a consulting business, she had started in her late 20s with a $40,000 loan from a credit union in Mississauga. She could leave. She had always been able to leave. The calculation she was running was of a different kind. The cost to her sense of herself as someone who did not walk away, who had never once in her life walked away, who had come too far and survived too much to let anyone drive her from a room she had a right to occupy. She did not sleep for a long time. The gathering that year had a guest list larger than usual. Frederick's family had invited several of what Evelyn called their more significant friends, a phrase that meant people with profiles, public positions, inherited names. Among the guests at the dinner on the third evening were a retired senator from Ontario, whose family had summered on Georgian Bay for 4 generations, a federal court judge who golfed with Frederick's father twice a year, and the founder of one of the country's oldest private investment firms, a man named Prescott Aldridge, whose grandfather had built the company and whose own contribution to it was primarily staying in the way of anyone who might change it. They had all arrived in the late afternoon by various combinations of float plane and private car. The dinner table that evening seated 22 people. Osei had been seated at the far end, near the window, beside Catherine's Vancouver friend, who had never heard of her company and was genuinely interested in her work, which she appreciated, and which also made her feel the specific loneliness of being known only by the people who hadn't been told to dismiss her. The dinner was catered. There were 3 courses. The wine was good because everything in Muskoka for the Calloways was good by default, the baseline of their existence being a level most people could not achieve by trying. Frederick was seated near his father at the other end of the table. He was animated and engaged. He laughed at the right moments. He was comfortable. She watched him from the far end of the table and felt something she had stopped being able to name clearly. Not anger, not grief, more like the experience of looking at a photograph of a place you once believed you knew. The incident happened between the first and second course. She had said something. She could not even remember what. Something small, an observation about the lake, about the weather turning, and Douglas, who was seated 2 chairs away, had turned to the man beside him and continued a story he had been telling, as though she had not spoken. It was so ordinary, so perfectly timed, that the table barely registered it. But she had spoken, and the table had continued, and her voice had simply not been part of the room. She reached for her water glass. Frederick, from his end of the table, was watching her. She could feel it. She looked up and found his eyes, and in them she saw something she recognized after 9 years. The look of a man who knew something was wrong and was choosing not to know it. "Osei," he said, from the other end of the table, not loudly. She turned. "Could you pass the bread to Douglas?" She looked at him for a moment. The bread was on the sideboard behind Douglas. Douglas could have reached it himself with less effort than it had taken Frederick to cross the table with his voice. She passed the bread. Later she would think that what happened next was the result of the bread. Not the bread itself, but the specific quality of the moment. The accumulated weight of 9 years, pressing through the unremarkable gesture of passing something to a man who had just erased her from a conversation. She had just set the basket down when she felt Frederick's hand on her wrist. Not violently, but firmly, in a way that was not about bread at all. In a way that was about all the times she had not passed bread quietly enough, had not smiled warmly enough, had not made herself small enough to fit the shape of the space they had assigned her. "Relax," he said, quietly, just to her. She turned to look at him, and then his hand came up, quickly, not planned, not considered, and the back of his hand caught this of her face. The sound it made was the loudest thing that had ever happened in that room, and the room went very still. The way rooms go still when something has occurred that is impossible to unoccur. 22 people at the table. The retired senator from Ontario, the federal court judge, Prescott Aldridge and his family, Catherine, Douglas, Evelyn, Frederick's father. Not one of them moved. The man from Vancouver, Catherine's friend, started to stand. Then he looked at Catherine and he sat back down. Osei did not put her hand to her face. She sat very straight. She looked at Frederick and he looked at her. And what passed between them in that moment was the entire 9 years. Every dinner table, every gathering, every morning on the deck with her phone, every conversation he had declined to enter. "Okay," she said. She stood, put her napkin on the table, with the care of someone who understood the value of deliberate action, and walked out of the dining room. Her footsteps on the stone floor were very clear in the silence. Nobody followed her. She went to the room that was not their room, the smallest guest room, the farthest from everything. And she sat on the edge of the bed, and she called her chief operating officer in Waterloo, a woman named Priscilla Chukwu, who had been with her since the beginning, who answered on the second ring, who said nothing for a moment when Osei told her what had happened, and then said, "Tell me where you are, and I'll come get you." "Not yet," Osei said. "What do you need?" She thought about it. "I need you to send me the Q4 projections, the full deck." There was a pause. "It's 10 o'clock on a Wednesday night in August," Priscilla said. "I know what time it is." She heard the sound of a chair, a keyboard. "Sending now," Priscilla said. "Dr. Osei." "Yeah. I'm going to call you back in 30 minutes. If you don't answer, I'm driving up there." "I'll answer," she said. She looked at the ceiling. The room had a window that faced the dock. From somewhere on the water, she could hear the sound of the Calloway boat, idling in the dark. The gathering continued without her. She did not go back to the dining room. No one knocked on the door of the small guest room. This was the thing she had learned about the Calloway family over 9 years. They were not capable of cruelty in the active sense. They were capable only of omission, of silence, of the kind of absence that could not be prosecuted. Around midnight, Frederick came to the room. He was composed. This was one of his abilities, the return to composure. He sat on the edge of the chair by the window, and he said that he was sorry, that he didn't know what had come over him, that he wanted to talk. She looked at him from the bed. She had changed into her travel clothes. Her bag was partially repacked. "I know who you are in this family," she said. "I have always known." He started to speak. "Let me finish." She said it quietly, without heat. "I stayed because I was certain that what I felt in the beginning was real. I stayed because I am not someone who leaves. I stayed because every time I thought about going, I told myself that the problem was a problem that patience could fix." 9 years is a very long time to be wrong about something. He said that he loved her. She believed he thought this was true. "That's not the same as being on my side," she said. He had no answer for that. There was a long silence. The water moved outside. She did not leave that night. She stayed in the small room with the door locked, and she worked on her phone until her eyes hurt. And then she slept in her clothes, and in the morning she was the first one up. The last morning of the gathering, Evelyn came to find her on the deck. This had never happened before in 9 years. Osei had always gone to the kitchen where Evelyn was. The reversal was interesting. Evelyn sat in the chair across from her. She was wearing a cream linen blouse, and she looked out at the lake before she looked at Osei. And Osei thought, not for the first time, that Evelyn Calloway was not an unintelligent woman. She was a woman who had deployed her intelligence entirely in the service of maintaining the world as she had received it. "I want you to understand," Evelyn said, "that what happened at dinner—" "I'm not going to talk about what happened at dinner with you," Osei said. Evelyn blinked. "I understand that you're uncomfortable," Osei continued. "I understand that in your experience, when something embarrassing occurs in a family, the women absorb it. The women manage it. The women make themselves smaller so that the shape of the family can stay the same." She looked at her coffee cup. "I'm not going to do that, Osei, my company," she said. "Closed a Series D round last spring, $312 million. The lead investors were 2 sovereign wealth funds and a consortium I built from a cold call I made at 11 o'clock at night to a number I found in a public filing, because that is how I have always built things, alone, at night, with a phone and the belief that I was worth the call." She finally looked at Evelyn directly. "I have spent 9 years in this family, performing a version of myself that fits in this room. I don't know why I thought that was the price of belonging. But I know it isn't something I have any more of. The capacity to be smaller, I'm out of it." Evelyn said nothing. The loon called again from the north. The lake was the color of pewter. "I'd like to finish my coffee," Osei said. Evelyn stood. She smoothed her linen blouse. She walked back into the house. The drive home was 4 hours. Osei made it alone. She did not play music. She stopped once for coffee at a Tim Hortons outside Barrie and sat in the parking lot for 11 minutes, looking at the industrial park across the road and thinking about nothing in particular, which was the closest she could get to rest. Her phone buzzed continuously. Her COO, her lawyer, a reporter from the Globe and Mail who had somehow already heard something, though she did not yet understand how. She did not answer the reporter. She answered Priscilla. "The thing with the Globe," Osei said. "How?" "Douglas's wife posted something," Priscilla said. "Derated it, but it was up long enough." Osei was quiet for a moment. What did it say? That there had been an incident at the gathering and that the family was managing it privately. She didn't name anyone. She didn't have to. "Because of who I am. Because of who you are," Priscilla confirmed. Osei looked at the parking lot. A man in a fleet truck was backing out of a space with unnecessary difficulty. She watched him manage it. "Okay," she said. "Get me Hargreaves, her lawyer, and pull the CBC interview." "The Tuesday one?" "Yes. It's in 2 days. I know. I want to be ready." She did not anticipate the news cycle the way it happened, because she had not anticipated that the story would break the way it did. Not through the deleted post, not through the Globe contact, but through a single clip that someone at the gathering had recorded on their phone and shared with someone who shared it with someone who sent it to a producer at CBC's flagship national newscast. The clip was 14 seconds long. It showed the side of a dining room, out of focus at the edges, with the sound of conversation, and then the sound, and then the silence that followed, and then Osei standing, placing her napkin on the table, and walking from the room with her back straight and her head level. She was recognizable immediately. She was recognizable because the week before the Muskoka gathering, she had been profiled in the Report on Business as one of the 10 most influential technology leaders in the country. The profile had run with a photograph of her standing at the window of her 42nd floor office, looking north over the city, with the text of the article wrapped around her. The clip ran on CBC at 6 o'clock on a Friday evening. By 6:15, the Calloway name was attached to the story. By 6:30, the retired senator from Ontario had released a statement expressing his concern and indicating he had spoken with local police. By 7, the federal court judge had made 2 phone calls, one to his Judicial Conduct Office and one, reportedly, to Frederick Calloway III. By 8 o'clock, Frederick Calloway III was in a police cruiser in Bracebridge, and the Muskoka gathering was over. Osei watched the 6 o'clock broadcast from the couch in her own house in Toronto. She was drinking tea. Her dog, a large, patient, gray-muzzled rescue named after a neighborhood she had grown up in, was asleep against her leg. She watched herself walk from the dining room on the 14-second clip, and she thought that she looked exactly the way she had felt. Like a person who had run out of room to be smaller and had found, at the end of it, that she was still standing. Her phone was ringing. She let it ring. Priscilla texted, "CBC wants a comment for the 10 o'clock. Your call." She thought about it. She set down her tea. She picked up her phone and typed, "Tell them. Dr. Osei is aware of the coverage and will address it in due course. She is grateful for the many messages of support and asks for privacy as she takes the time to make considered decisions." She sent it. Then she added, "Also tell them the Q1 earnings call is still on for the 14th. I'm not rescheduling." She set the phone face down on the cushion beside her. She put her hand on the dog's gray flank, and the dog's breathing did not change. The calls came from everywhere in the days that followed. From women she had never met who had sat at tables like that one. From men who said they were ashamed. From a woman in Brampton who said she had worked with Osei's father once, decades ago, in a factory near the airport, and had always wondered what had happened to that family. She answered some of them. Most of them she kept, logged in a document her assistant maintained, because she had been in business long enough to know that a moment like this one was also a statement. And a statement required a response, not because the world deserved one, but because she had spent her entire life refusing to be erased, and this, too, was a form of presence. Frederick's lawyer made contact through Hargreaves. There were conversations about process. Osei listened to all of them. She had built a company across 3 funding rounds and 2 pivots and a global pandemic, and she had negotiated every major term personally, because she trusted her own read of a situation more than anyone she had ever hired, and she was rarely wrong about the room. She was not wrong about this one. She did not return to the cottage. She never went back for her things. She had Priscilla arrange for someone to collect them, a detail she did not think about more than once. She thought instead about the drive back from Barrie, and the parking lot outside the Tim Hortons, and the man with the fleet truck who had eventually, with enough patience, gotten himself out of the spot he was stuck in. She thought about what it meant to have taken that long, to do something so obvious. She thought about her father's suitcase, held shut with a belt. She thought about the credit union loan, and the cold call at 11 o'clock at night, and the 42nd floor window and the loon, still calling from the north, long after everyone else had stopped listening. There was a board meeting the following Tuesday. She chaired it. She wore the same earrings she had worn to the Muskoka gathering because they were her best earrings and she saw no reason to retire them. She presented the Q4 outlook and fielded questions from the investment committee and answered every one of them with the precision that had made her what she was. After the meeting, one of the newer board members, A woman from Vancouver, who had joined the previous spring, caught her in the corridor outside the boardroom. "I just want to say," the woman said, and then stopped because there were too many things she might mean. "Thank you," Osei said, because that was what she had learned to say when people stood in front of her, trying to express something larger than their vocabulary. She took the elevator down to the lobby. The city was gray and bright and enormous around her. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment before her car arrived, and she looked up at the building. 42 floors of glass reflecting the September sky. And she thought of nothing in particular, which was something she had always found very difficult, and which she was getting, finally, a little better at.